Welcome to Module 1. In his book Pale Blue Dot, Carl Sagan takes a long view of the Earth, seeing it as a minute point against the fabric of black space. This small biosphere, however complex, rich, and verdant, is all you and I have ever known. Every human experience, every war, every triumph, every inexpressible love and heartbreak has taken place on this terrain of matter. And Earth is minute in two ways, both with reference to space and time. In terms of time, view the geological timeline on the right of your screen of this module. Placed in the breadth between Los Angeles and New York, human beings made their first significant appearance 200,000 years ago, even as we have been evolving for over 2.4 million years in our current form. Our planet is over 4 billion years old in a universe that is over 14 billion years old. Now, scientists believe that of the quadrillions of stars in the known universe, over 85% of them have planets circling in orbit high above. They hypothesize. Now, some of these planets are Earth-like, most are not, but we are learning, even from studies on our own seafloor where nothing should be growing, that even indeed life emerges where there is no sunlight, but only a chemical bath of organic matter clustered around thermal vents. Life is resilient. But we are certainly only here for a short time, new arrivals in an ancient universe. Now, these are my first remarks on time. In terms of space, we now know that when our early star exploded into life, well, at the level of neutrinos, or these minute particles of what we call dust, had a tenacious capacity for glomming on to one another. Those particles became pebble-like, and then rock-like, and then boulder-like. And then the excitement begins. Protoplanets slammed into one another with an exertion that sent bodies into spinning orbit. The last major explosion on our planet Earth involved a protoplanet a third the size of Earth, which sheared off a portion of Earth at that time. That sheared portion ultimately became our moon, now locked in Earth's orbit. But the expanse of our universe is so great that pondering it in terms of distance between points presses the capacity of human consciousness to fathom even what words are attempting to express. So in short, in terms of space, we are inexpressibly small in the massive cosmos above and all around us. And finally, the vastness of space is so expansive that even time itself is not a constant therein. We're spatial and temporal eddies, like we might imagine while whitewater rafting down the Colorado River, distort any universal constant for space-time. And yet, in terms of both space and time, we are not cosmological drops in the universe without existential poise or meaning in the universe. You and I are conscious. We have agency in ways that are central to our discussion throughout this course, especially in Module 7, where we will ask the question of human purpose in the cosmos. In theological terms, we call that question of human purpose one of our agency in the universe. We call that term teleology. Teleology, from the Greek term for telos, means proper end, substantial purpose, and addresses questions of why we are here, what we should be doing while we're here in the universe, how we go about meeting that purpose, and where this is all leading, both us and the cosmos around us. Now, against the backdrop of space and time, as I'm broad brushing for the sake of getting us into Module 1, here's another idea we must contend with today. That is, throughout history, we have paradigms of thought that direct our thought. Paradigms are sets or principles, assumptive sets, that inform a particular worldview for that time. For instance, consider the Age of Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries. This age introduced reason as a principal source of trusted authority that shaped modern constitutional governments, nation-states, advanced humanist ideals of liberty and tolerance and fraternity, and generally framed the legal and moral authorities of modern life. Now, you might be witnessing, as I am, all of the turbulence of war and fanaticism and religious ideology such as ISIS, and homemade Christian, inflexible, and even proto-fascist networks. And witnessing all of this, you might ask yourself, as I do, well, reason may be a primary source of authority for the Age of Enlightenment, but that age misunderstood the capacity of the human being and society to act really poorly in the world. Reason sounds like a good idea, but we can also be very irrational. It's true that yesterday's revolutions, such as an Age of Enlightenment, for instance, only ever see part of the story. Paradigms always have blind spots, and that's important to remember. They can identify certain undeniable aspects of our humanity, such as our ability to act irrationally. They can miss this point. And it's in this spirit that I want to draw your attention to an undeniable aspect of our contemporary life. And that is, not unlike the Age of Enlightenment and the consequent upheaval therein, you and I are entering a paradigmatic shift on a revolutionary scale. The societal structures that were authoritative for modern and now postmodern life are undergoing destructive transformations, and we see these transformations, constructive and destructive, in cancer research, the sciences generally, introduction of artificial intelligence, information technology, the sciences, and more. And I mentioned this at the introduction of our course already, so I won't belabor it here. But respected theologian Catherine Vinci, in her text for our course today, begins our current module with a very concise recognition of what she calls an axial age, which started with the revolutions as she identifies in Copernicus and Galileo. Both Copernicus and Galileo are philosophers and astronomers who assisted in decentering the Earth as the center of the universe. Through both of these thinkers, Earth lost its centrality as the sun took over that position in our solar system. The decentering of privileged perspective, such as a heliocentric or sun-centered solar system that displaces an Earth-centered or geocentric model, well, it creates cultural trembling. That's Vinci's term. Think of this in our own lives and in society today. When we displace the hub of power and meaning, the orbits of the spheres that shape our lives may not have changed, and yet our perceived relationship to them has changed, and this makes all the difference. What? The sun doesn't actually rise, you say? The Earth rotates at 25,000 miles in 24 hours? That's true. It's spinning around the sun. Perspective matters. We still say sunrise, however. Back to paradigms. Here's the point I want to make for our module on this subject. American physicist and philosopher Thomas Kuhn wrote a groundbreaking work in 1968 titled The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. If you love philosophy of science, this is a nail-biting text, and what I encourage you to read. Now, in it, Kuhn notes that the really big paradigms do shift, not unlike from the Age of Enlightenment to our current age. And a paradigm shift does a few things when it shifts. First, nearly overnight, the anomaly, or the thing no one seriously anticipated, like science fiction idea out there perhaps, becomes the center. No one expected, for instance, that Galileo would change science itself. That's an example. Second, this displacement in what the former paradigm took for granted is never a minor change. That is, paradigm shifts are really disruptive. They impact the entire system and society itself, like a conceptual meteorite or asteroid that strikes the surface of a seemingly pleasant biosphere. Think of the Age of Enlightenment. It asserts that the truths of reason were sufficient for truth itself. Religious revelation was typified as a kind of fairy tale, even though I have to say, early science, much of it was methodologically very weak and based on a lot of conjecture. It was totally unsupported evidentially by reason. But I digress. This brings me to my third marker for paradigm shifts that are essential for you to know given our reading for this module. Think of my reference a moment ago to paradigm shifts being equivalent to a meteor or an asteroid strike as an impact. With disruptions of this kind, it takes time for the air to clear, for a rebalance to take hold, and for a valley of relative peaceableness to reinstate itself. Then, like it or not, once the paradigm is recentered, there's a tendency for another rupture. I want you to see this pattern in paradigm shifts, because in our reading today, like me, Vinci is drawing on the work of Thomas Kuhn and the new cosmology. In this module, Vinci is making a case for how such paradigmatic disruption in science impacts theology. Vinci is drawing on a rich and equally turbulent, over 350-year-old conversation, sometimes frankly a yelling match, that in shorthand is said to be the conflict between science and faith, or faith and reason. Now, just as Cliff Notes on Shakespeare's Hamlet don't do justice to actually reading the play itself, so also the seemingly popular divide between science and faith, or faith and reason, doesn't do justice to the greater search for meaning in human life that transcends both. This whole argument of a rift or ditch between the things of science and the things of theology began when the philosopher Johann Gottfried Lessing, he was German, lived from 1729 to 1781, stated in his later infamously titled Lessing's Ditch, he stated that the facts of history cannot be used to prove the existence of miracles. Now, the argument is a lot more complex than this, but the Cliff Notes on this disagreement created the image of a ditch in the Enlightenment consciousness, with reason and the proofs of history on one side and faith and the facts of religion on the other. Now, you and I are inheritors of this dual perspective, which we inherit today in popular form as the disagreement between science and faith. And I want to suggest to you that this dichotomy between reason and science, and faith and religion, or science and theology, is an inaccurate, popularized, Cliff Note version we should do away with. Free yourself. Theologians never claimed to be uninterested in historical fact, or for that matter, in the soft and hard sciences. And in fact, there are a great number of theologians who are scientifically trained and vice versa. There are theologians with PhDs in physics and more, for instance. At the same time, the wonder and awe of the cosmos, both external and indeed internal in all of us, of our own consciousness, was never a metaphysical terrain closed to any scientific pursuit. It's an odd and unhealthy bifurcation of our humanity to live by a false ditch, which arbitrarily places reason and faith on two ends of a spectrum. In order to address the paradigm shift in our cosmological self-understanding today, I suggest to you in this course that rather than see a false distinction between science and theology, delve into this class with a view to mystery itself. Human beings, yes, including scientists and theologians, are meaning makers. We are seeking ways to inherit the wind and to decipher the mystery of the cosmos, which requires courage and vision and a mind given to integrating what may often seem to be disparate parts. I've chosen texts of leading scholars, including Vinci and Haut, for this course. They will delve into distinctions between science and religion, and I ask that you trust them as an engaged reader, but also with a constructively critical eye. Vinci will conclude her reading on the matter of how scientific discovery is shaping religious inquiry. I am interested in how human meaning-making, including in science and religion, introduce vibrant theological fuel for inquiry. And in our reading this week, Haut, also respected in his field, is asking a critical question about the meaning of religion, and in particular, given his emphasis on Christian meaning, how does something specific, or does religion have something specific and unique to say to the nature of human hope? Now, something I've always appreciated about Carl Sagan, which you'll see in this module in the reading, and which I suggest to you, is that since before we learned to use simple tools and bury our people with basic grave goods, hope was the most powerful aspect of our communal life and well-being. Haut is telling us in the reading this week that hope is the hallmark of discovery in the world. Hope, especially in a time of paradigmatic shifts from one cosmology or worldview to another, calls all of us into the future. We don't hope in the past. We don't place our hope in the present right now necessarily. Hope is always a quality of our humanity. that is turning to the very immediate, middle, or distant future. Both Vinci and Hout are seeking a theological language in an age of discovery that is focused on how we are agents of hope in the world that shouldn't be threatened by disruption, at least not to an extent that we miss our capacity to imagine a viable future and us in it. Go ahead and read Vinci, Hout, and Sagan, and thereafter turn to the module Stellar Observation, read the directions therein, including viewing the video of the Andromeda Galaxy. Let me say a word about that Andromeda video for this module. You will note that in this module, in the Stellar Observation, there is reference to a January 2014 sharp long-range photograph of another galaxy. Laid end-to-end, this photograph covers 6 football fields. Now the photo is of Andromeda, our closest galactic neighbor. Discoveries in astronomy and astrophysics are allowing us today to view never-before imagined or seen images like this right up close. Watch the video a few times and remind yourself that at its closest perspective, just as the camera begins to pan to the left toward the center of the galaxy, what appears to be kind of similar to a television screen static is in fact a blanket of stars. Each small pixelated dot is a star, and again, scientists believe that 85% of stars in the universe have planets orbiting them. Sometimes pictures do speak 1,000 words. You may feel like you're being thrown into the deep end of the pool a little with this lecture and the readings. I might agree with that. But graduate education is entrusting the capacity of your own education and life experience to make this a rich time of discovery. As ever, be in contact with me with any questions you may now have. Now, please get working further into Module 1.